Marcus Chin stared at the cream-colored invitation in his hands, the elegant script dancing before his tired eyes. Lincoln High School class of 2014, 10-year reunion. The paper felt expensive between his calloused fingers, a stark contrast to the oil-stained uniform he wore at the auto repair shop where he spent most of his days. He almost threw it in the trash. Almost. The invitation had arrived on a particularly rough day. Mrs. Henderson, his elderly neighbor, had brought it over with a concerned expression. She found it mixed in with her mail, the postal worker having made yet another mistake with their similar apartment numbers. Marcus lived in 4B, she in 4A, in a rundown complex on the east side of town where dreams went to die slowly. "You sure you want to open that, honey?" Mrs. Henderson had asked, her weathered hands adjusting her reading glasses. She'd known Marcus since he was 12, had watched him struggle through high school while living with his grandmother after his parents died in a car accident. She remembered the bruises, the torn clothes, the way he'd come home each day looking more defeated than the last. But Marcus had opened it anyway, driven by some masochistic curiosity about the people who had made his teenage years a living hell. The reunion was set for Saturday night at the Grand Ballroom of the Riverside Hotel, the fanciest place in their small Pennsylvania town. Black tie optional, the invitation read, as if Marcus owned anything remotely resembling formal wear. The RSVP deadline had already passed, but there was a handwritten note at the bottom that made his stomach turn. Special invitation for Marcus Chun. Hope to see you there. The reunion committee. He recognized the handwriting immediately. Brittany Walsh, head cheerleader, prom queen, and the architect of some of his most humiliating high school memories. The girl who had once convinced half the football team to stuff him in a locker during lunch period. The same girl who had started the rumor that he wet himself during the SATs, a lie that followed him through his entire senior year. Why would they specifically invite him? The question gnawed at him as he walked the 3 blocks to work the next morning, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp October air. Lincoln Manufacturing had closed down 2 years ago, taking most of the good jobs with it. Now the town survived on a handful of small businesses, government assistance, and the stubborn pride of people who refused to leave the only place they'd ever called home. Tony's Auto Repair sat squeezed between a laundromat and a check-cashing store, its painted signs so faded you could barely make out the name. Marcus had been working there for 5 years, ever since he dropped out of community college when his grandmother got sick. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but Tony Ricardo was a good man who'd given Marcus a chance when no one else would. "You look like someone ran over your dog," Tony said as Marcus clocked in. The older man was already elbow-deep in the engine of a 2008 Honda Civic, his thick Brooklyn accent somehow comforting in its familiarity. "What's eating you, kid?" Marcus pulled out the invitation and handed it to Tony, who wiped his greasy hands on a shop rag before taking it. Tony's eyebrows rose as he read, a low whistle escaping his lips. "High school reunion. Huh? Those could be rough. I went to mine once, back in '78. Bunch of people pretending their lives turned out better than they did." Tony handed the invitation back. "You thinking about going?" "I don't know why I would," Marcus said, stuffing the paper into his back pocket. "High school wasn't exactly the best time of my life." Tony had heard enough stories over the years to know that was an understatement. Marcus had been the kid everyone picked on. Too smart for the popular kids, too poor for the smart kids, too quiet to defend himself effectively. His grandmother had worked 3 jobs to keep them afloat after his parents died, leaving Marcus to navigate the brutal social hierarchy of high school completely alone. "Sometimes facing the past ain't about them," Tony said, returning to his work on the Honda. "Sometimes it's about you. Seeing how far you've come, you know." But Marcus didn't feel like he'd come very far at all. At 28, he was still living in the same apartment complex where he'd grown up, still working with his hands for barely enough money to cover rent and groceries. His grandmother had passed away 3 years ago, leaving him truly alone in the world. No girlfriend, no real friends, no prospects beyond the next broken transmission or oil change. The day dragged on with its usual parade of beat-up cars and frustrated customers. Mrs. Rodriguez brought in her ancient Buick with a mysterious rattling sound. Mr. Peterson's pickup truck needed new brakes. A young mother with dark circles under her eyes counted out crumpled bills to pay for a diagnostic test on her only transportation to work. Each customer reminded Marcus of his place in the world's hierarchy. He was the guy you went to when you couldn't afford the dealership, when you needed someone who wouldn't judge you for driving a car held together with duct tape and prayer. He was good at his job, Better than good, really, but it wasn't the kind of work that earned respect or admiration for people like his former classmates. That evening, Marcus sat in his small apartment, eating a microwave dinner and staring at the invitation, which now lay open on his coffee table. The paper seemed to mock him with its elegant font and expensive cardstock. He imagined walking into that ballroom, wearing his one good button-down shirt and the khakis he'd bought for his grandmother's funeral, surrounded by people who had gone on to become doctors and lawyers and successful business owners. He thought about Brittany Walsh, who according to Facebook was now Brittany Walsh Montgomery, married to the heir of Montgomery Construction, living in a 6-bedroom house on the hill overlooking the town. Her profile was filled with pictures of exotic vacations, charity galas, and her 2 perfectly dressed children attending private school. Then there was Jason Hartwell, the quarterback who had once given Marcus a black eye for looking at him wrong in the hallway. Jason was now a pharmaceutical sales rep, driving a BMW and posting pictures of himself at expensive restaurants and golf courses. His wife was a former college cheerleader who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Even his smart kids had done well for themselves. Sarah Kim was a surgeon in Philadelphia. David Brennan was a partner at a law firm in Pittsburgh. Lisa Chong had started her own tech company and sold it for millions before she turned 30. What did Marcus have to show for the last 10 years? A GED instead of a college degree. Hands that were permanently stained with motor oil. A savings account with barely enough to cover an emergency. A life so small and unremarkable that he could disappear tomorrow and no one would notice for days. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that this was some kind of setup. Maybe Brittany and her friends had been sitting around at one of their wine and cheese parties, laughing about the old days when someone suggested inviting the class loser just for entertainment. They could all get a good laugh at what a failure he'd become, confirm their own success by comparison. But even as he told himself he wouldn't go, Marcus found himself researching the cost of renting a tuxedo. Even as he convinced himself it was a bad idea, he looked up directions to the Riverside Hotel. Even as he planned to throw the invitation away, he found himself carefully placing in the drawer with his grandmother's jewelry and his parents' wedding rings, the few precious things he owned. The truth was, part of him wanted to go. Not because he thought it would be fun or because he expected a warm welcome, but because he needed to see for himself how his life measured against theirs. He needed to face the people who had made him feel so worthless and prove to himself that he had survived, that he was still here, still standing, despite everything they had done to try to break him. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Work, home, sleep, repeat. But the invitation haunted his thoughts, appearing at unexpected moments like an unwelcome ghost. When he was replacing a transmission, he wondered what his classmates would think of his chosen profession. When he was eating alone in his apartment, he imagined sitting at a table full of people who barely remembered his name. On Wednesday, Tony noticed him checking his phone more frequently than usual, scrolling through social media profiles of people from his past. "You're torturing yourself, kid," Tony said, looking up from the engine he was rebuilding. "Either go to this thing or don't, but stop picking at it like a scab." "It's complicated," Marcus said, not looking up from his phone screen. "No, it ain't. You're scared they're going to make you feel small again. But here's the thing. You ain't that scared kid anymore. You're a man with a job and a life. Maybe it ain't fancy, but it's honest work, and there's dignity in that." Marcus wanted to believe Tony was right, but the wounds from high school ran deep. He remembered the day Brittany had organized a group of cheerleaders to follow him around school, loudly discussing all the things that were wrong with him. His clothes, his haircut, the way he walked, the fact that he brought lunch from home instead of buying in the cafeteria. By the end of the day, he had felt completely invisible, as if their words had somehow erased his very existence. That night, he pulled out his laptop and created a new document. If he was going to this reunion, he needed a plan. He couldn't just show up and hope for the best. He needed to prepare for every possible scenario, every cruel comment, every condescending smile. He started writing down what he would say if someone asked about his job, how he would explain his life choices without sounding defensive, how he would handle it if they ignored him completely, or worse, if they treated him like a charity case to be pitted. But as he wrote, something unexpected happened. He started remembering good things from high school too, like Mr. Rodriguez, the shop teacher who had first taught him about engines and seen potential in him when no one else did. Or the time he had helped Jessica Morrison with her calculus homework, and she had actually smiled at him, a genuine smile that had made him feel human for just a moment. He remembered the satisfaction of fixing his first car, a beaten-up Chevy that everyone said was beyond repair. He had spent months working on it in the school's automotive shop, staying late after everyone else had gone home. When he finally got it running, the sound of that engine turning over had been better than any applause or award. Maybe Tony was right. Maybe he wasn't the same scared kid who had walked those hallways 10 years ago. Maybe he had learned something about himself in the years since then, something that couldn't be measured in salary figures or job titles. By Friday night, Marcus had made his decision. He was going to the reunion, not to prove anything to them, but to prove something to himself. He was going to walk into that ballroom with his head held high and show them that they hadn't broken him, that despite everything they had done, he had survived and built a life for himself. He drove to the mall and spent half his week's pay on a decent shirt and tie. Nothing fancy, but clean and pressed and respectable. He got a haircut at the barbershop downtown, the first professional cut he'd had in over a year. He even splurged on a small bottle of cologne, though he wasn't sure why. That night, he stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie and trying to convince himself he was ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The man looking back at him didn't look like the scared teenager he had once been. There were lines around his eyes from squinting at engine parts, calluses on his hands from honest work, a steadiness in his gaze that came from surviving the worst and finding a way to keep going. Tomorrow, he would walk into that ballroom. Tomorrow, he would face his past. And tomorrow, he would find out once and for all whether Marcus Chun was really the class loser they remembered or something else entirely. Saturday evening arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made Marcus sweat through his shirt before he even left his apartment. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror for the third time, adjusting his tie and questioning every decision that had led him to this moment. The face staring back at him looked older than his 28 years, weathered by long hours under car hoods and the weight of low expectations. His hands shook slightly as he combed his hair one final time. The butterflies in his stomach felt more like angry wasps, buzzing with anxiety and half-formed regrets. He could still back out. He could spend the evening on his couch, watching Netflix and eating takeout, pretending he'd never received the invitation at all. But something deeper than fear drove him forward. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a need for closure. Or maybe it was just the stubborn streak he'd inherited from his grandmother, the woman who'd worked 3 jobs and never once complained about the hand life had dealt her. The drive to the Riverside Hotel took 12 minutes through the quiet streets of his hometown. Marcus had mapped out the route 3 times, even though he could have found his way blindfolded. The hotel sat on the edge of downtown, a renovated Victorian mansion that tried hard to be elegant, but couldn't quite escape its small-town roots. Valet parking signs directed guests to a circular driveway where luxury cars gleamed under carefully positioned spotlights. Marcus pulled his 15-year-old Honda Civic behind a Mercedes-Benz and immediately felt out of place. The valet, a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, looked at his car with barely concealed disdain before professionally masking his expression. "Welcome to the Riverside Hotel, sir," the young man said, accepting Marcus's keys with the careful politeness reserved for customers who obviously wouldn't be tipping well. The hotel lobby buzzed with familiar voices, even though Marcus couldn't immediately place any faces. 10 years had changed everyone, adding pounds and wrinkles and the particular kind of confidence that came from achieving the American dream, or at least the appearance of it. Women who had been girls when he last saw them now wore designer dresses and carried purses that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. Men who had been boys strutted around in expensive suits, their voices deeper and their hairlines higher, but their essential selves unchanged. Marcus recognized the laughter first, that particular pitch and cadence that belonged to Brittany Walsh, now holding court near the ballroom entrance. She looked exactly like her Facebook photos suggested, perfectly maintained blonde hair, a dress that showed off a figure preserved by personal trainers, and expensive treatments, jewelry that caught the light with every gesture. She was surrounded by her usual crowd, the inner circle of popularity that had ruled their high school with an iron fist wrapped in lip gloss and false smiles. For a moment, Marcus considered turning around and walking back to his car. The valet would probably be relieved. But before he could move, Brittany's gaze found his across the lobby, and her face lit up with what looked like genuine delight. "Marcus Chun," she called out. loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "Oh my God, I can't believe you actually came." Every conversation in the immediate vicinity stopped. Heads turned toward Marcus with expressions ranging from surprise to amusement to something that might have been pity. He felt like a specimen under a microscope, being examined by scientists who had already drawn their conclusions. Brittany glided across the lobby with the grace of someone who had been walking in high heels since middle school. Her entourage followed like a school of decorative fish, their eyes fixed on Marcus with predatory interest. "Marcus, you look—" She paused, her gaze taking in his off-the-rack shirt and discount tie. "You look exactly the same. Isn't that sweet, girls?" The girls, women now, but somehow still girls in the way they clustered around Brittany, murmured agreement with the synchronized enthusiasm of a church choir. Jennifer Walsh, Brittany's cousin and longtime second-in-command, smiled with all her teeth showing. "Marcus, we were just talking about you the other day, wondering what you've been up to all these years." Jennifer's voice carried the particular tone of someone trying very hard to sound interested, while making it clear they expected to be disappointed by the answer. "Working," Marcus said simply, proud of himself for keeping his voice steady. "Auto repair." "Oh, how practical," Brittany said, the pause before practical loaded with meaning. "I always thought you were so smart, though. Didn't you have the highest SAT scores in our class? What happened to college?" The question hit like a slap, not because it was particularly cruel, but because it was asked with such casual thoughtlessness. As if the complexities of his life, his grandmother's illness, the financial pressure, the simple reality of being poor, could be dismissed with a shrug and a backhanded compliment about his intelligence. "Life happened," Marcus said, and left it at that. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Jason Hartwell appeared, looking like a pharmaceutical sales rep's version of success. His suit was perfectly tailored, his smile blindingly white, and his handshake crushingly firm. "Marcus, dude, I didn't think you'd show. This is awesome." Jason's enthusiasm seemed genuine, which somehow made it worse. "Man, high school feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? We were all just kids then. Kids." As if the bullying had been some innocent phase they'd all grown out of, rather than a systematic campaign that had shaped Marcus's entire adolescence. But Jason seemed to genuinely believe his own revisionist history, which made him almost more dangerous than Brittany's calculated cruelty. "Come on, let's get you a drink," Jason continued, clapping Marcus on the shoulder with the casual assumption of friendship. "We need to catch up. I want to hear everything." The ballroom had been decorated with the school colors, navy blue and gold, and enlarged photos from their senior year covered every wall. Marcus found himself staring at images of people he barely remembered, frozen in moments of manufactured joy. The prom court, the homecoming parade, the football team celebrating their regional championship. He wasn't in any of the pictures, of course. He had been present for most of these events, but invisible, occupying the negative spaces between other people's memories. The bar was an island of activity in the center of the room, staffed by professional bartenders who moved with efficient grace. Marcus ordered a beer, the cheapest option available, while Jason got something complicated involving premium vodka and fresh fruit. "So auto repair, huh?" Jason said, leaning against the bar with practiced casualness. "That's cool, man. Really cool. There's something to be said for working with your hands, you know? Creating something real." The condescension was so thick Marcus could practically see it, but Jason seemed completely unaware of how he sounded. In his mind, he was probably being generous and understanding, acknowledging the dignity of manual labor from his position of white-collar success. "What about you?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from Facebook. "Pharmaceutical sales. I'm regional manager now for 3 states. Just got promoted last month, actually." Jason's chest puffed out slightly with pride. "It's crazy rewarding, you know? Helping doctors get the medications their patients need. Making a real difference in people's lives." Marcus nodded politely, sipping his beer and wondering if Jason actually believed what he was saying or if the lies had simply become so practiced they felt like truth. The pharmaceutical industry's help was well documented, from the opioid crisis to the insulin price gouging that killed diabetics who couldn't afford their medications. "And you're married?" Marcus asked, though the wedding ring made the answer obvious. 5 years next month. Ashley's amazing. She was Miss Pennsylvania runner-up in college. We've got 2 kids now, Emma and Jason Jr. They're incredible. Jason pulled out his phone to show pictures of the family, so perfect they looked like stock photography. "What about you?" Anyone special in your life? The question was casual, but Marcus heard the real meaning underneath. Are you still alone? Are you still the loser who couldn't get a date to prom? Have you managed to find someone willing to settle for your limited prospects? Not at the moment, Marcus said, which was the polite way of saying he hadn't been in a serious relationship since community college, when he'd dated a girl named Maria until her parents convinced her she could do better. Well, you're young. Plenty of time. Jason's tone was the kind of hearty encouragement you'd give to a child who struck out in Little League. The right person will come along when you least expect it. The conversation was mercifully interrupted by the arrival of more classmates, drawn by the gravitational pull of Jason's personality and the novelty of Marcus's presence. Soon Marcus found himself surrounded by a semicircle of people who remembered him just well enough to be curious about his current state of failure. There was David Brennan, the class valedictorian turned successful lawyer, who asked probing questions about Marcus's career aspirations with the clinical precision of a cross-examination. Sarah Kim, now Dr. Kim, managed to work her medical degree into every sentence while expressing surprise that Marcus had stayed local instead of seeking opportunities elsewhere. Lisa Chong, the tech entrepreneur, spoke in startup buzzwords and kept checking her Apple Watch as if more important people might need her attention at any moment. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial surprise at his presence, polite inquiries about his life, barely concealed shock at his answers, and then the particular kind of smile people wore when they felt sorry for you, but didn't want to be rude about it. Marcus found himself retreating into the practiced responses he'd rehearsed. Yes, he enjoyed his work. No, he wasn't planning to go back to school. Yes, he was happy with his life. The lies came easier with repetition, until he almost believed them himself. The evening's program included dinner at tables assigned by an algorithm designed to mix different social groups, presumably to encourage mingling and prevent the reformation of high school cliques. Marcus found himself seated between Mrs. Patterson, their old English teacher who barely remembered him, and Kevin Walsh, a quiet kid who'd been even lower on the social hierarchy than Marcus, and had somehow transformed himself into a confident software engineer. Kevin's transformation was genuinely inspiring. The shy, awkward boy who'd been picked on for his stutter and thick glasses had evolved into an articulate man with a successful career and a quiet confidence that came from actual achievement rather than inherited privilege. When he talked about his work developing accessibility software, his passion was evident and infectious. I always remembered how hard it was to feel invisible in high school, Kevin told Marcus during the salad course. So I decided to dedicate my career to making sure other people don't get overlooked. Technology should serve everyone, not just the people who already have advantages. It was the first genuine conversation Marcus had all evening, and he found himself relaxing for the first time since walking into the hotel. Here was someone who understood what it felt like to be dismissed and ignored, who had channeled that experience into something meaningful. But their conversation was interrupted by the evening's main event, a slideshow presentation of Where Are They Now? Updates. One by one, his classmates stood up to share their accomplishments with the assembled crowd. Medical degrees, law partnerships, successful businesses, beautiful families, exotic vacations, charitable works, political campaigns. The parade of success stories felt like a coordinated assault on anyone who had dared to live a smaller, quieter life. When a microphone came to Marcus's table, he felt every eye in the room focus on him with laser intensity. Mrs. Patterson looked confused, as if trying to place him in her memory. Kevin gave him an encouraging smile. At the head table, Brittany watched with the predatory interest of a cat studying a cornered mouse. Marcus Chun, the MC announced, reading from a card that had obviously been prepared in advance. Marcus is, let's see, working in automotive repair here in town. The pause before automotive repair was loaded with meaning, and the polite smattering of applause that followed felt like the kind of acknowledgement you'd give to a child's participation trophy. Marcus stood up briefly, nodded to acknowledge the introduction, and sat back down as quickly as possible. But the damage was done. The contrast between his humble introduction and the elaborate success stories that surrounded it couldn't have been more stark. He felt the weight of their collective pity and judgment, the silent confirmation that he had become exactly what they'd always predicted he would be. The slideshow continued, but Marcus barely heard it. He was too busy planning his escape, calculating how soon he could politely leave without confirming their assumptions about his character. He had come here to prove something to himself, but All he'd proven was that some wounds never fully healed, and some social hierarchies were carved too deep to ever truly escape. As the evening wore on, and the alcohol flowed more freely, the careful politeness began to erode. Comments became sharper, laughter more pointed, glances more obvious. Marcus became the evening's cautionary tale, the reminder of what happened when you didn't reach for more, when you accepted the limitations life placed on you instead of fighting to transcend them. By the time dessert was served, Marcus had decided he'd had enough. He would finish his meal, thank the appropriate people for a lovely evening, and drive home to his small apartment where he could lick his wounds in private. He'd satisfied his curiosity about his former classmates and confirmed what he'd always suspected. That time hadn't healed anything. It had just made the differences more obvious. But as he prepared to make his excuses and leave, the ballroom's carefully orchestrated atmosphere was about to be shattered by something none of them could have anticipated. The first sign that something was different came during the coffee service. Marcus had just pushed back his chair, ready to make his polite excuses and escape to the parking lot, when a low rumbling sound began to vibrate through the hotel's ornate windows. At first, most people assumed it was thunder from an approaching storm, but the sound was too rhythmic, too mechanical, too purposeful. Conversations gradually died as the noise grew louder and more distinct. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of rotor blades became unmistakable, though it seemed impossible that a helicopter would be flying so low over their small town on a Saturday night. Through the ballroom's tall windows, the darkness outside began to flicker with strange patterns of light. "What the hell is that?" Jason Hartwell muttered, his pharmaceutical sales rep confidence wavering for the first time all evening. Mrs. Patterson, their former English teacher, looked genuinely alarmed. "That sounds like it's right on top of us." The ballroom's French doors opened onto a large outdoor terrace that overlooked the hotel's gardens and the river beyond. A few brave souls ventured outside to investigate. Their formal were incongruous against the night sky. What they saw made them immediately scramble back inside, faces pale with shock and confusion. "There's a military helicopter out there," David Brennan announced to the room, his lawyer's training making him the first to organize his thoughts enough to speak clearly. "It's hovering right over the terrace. It's got spotlights and everything." The entire reunion fell silent, except for the increasingly loud sound of the helicopter. Through the windows, they could see powerful beams of light sweeping across the hotel grounds, illuminating the carefully manicured gardens in stark detail. The aircraft was close enough that they could make out its military markings, the angular lines of what looked like an Apache attack helicopter. Brittany Walsh clutched her husband's arm, her perfectly composed facade cracking for the first time all evening. "Why would there be a military helicopter here? This is a private event." Hotel staff began appearing in the doorways, looking as confused as the guests. The manager, a thin man in an ill-fitting suit, approached the microphone with visible nervousness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're not sure what's happening, but we've been advised by local authorities to remain inside while they assess the situation. Please stay calm," and his words were cut off as the helicopter's engines changed pitch, the aircraft obviously preparing to land on the hotel's expansive front lawn. The sound was deafening now, rattling the windows and causing several women to cover their ears. Through the glass, they could see the aircraft's landing lights creating an impromptu helipad in what had been pristine landscaping moments before. "This is insane," Lisa Chong said, her tech entrepreneur confidence completely evaporated. "Military helicopters don't just land at wedding venues. Something serious is happening." The helicopter settled onto the lawn with surprising gentleness for such a fearsome-looking machine. The rotor wash scattered leaves and decorative mulch in all directions, and several of the hotel's outdoor furniture pieces were blown across the terrace despite their heavy construction. As the engines wound down to idle, the sudden relative quiet felt almost more ominous than the noise had been. Everyone in the ballroom pressed toward the windows, craning their necks to see what would happen next. The helicopter's crew compartment remained closed, its dark windows revealing nothing about who might be inside or why they had chosen this moment and place to land. "Maybe it's a medical emergency," Kevin Walsh suggested hopefully. "Someone could have been injured nearby." But even as he spoke, everyone knew that didn't explain the timing or the military nature of the aircraft. Medical helicopters were civilian aircraft, usually brightly colored and clearly marked. This was something else entirely, something that spoke of official business and serious intent. Marcus found himself pushed toward the front of the crowd by the shifting mass of curious classmates. His position gave him a clear view through the French doors as the helicopter's side door finally opened. What emerged was not what anyone expected. The first figure to exit the aircraft was clearly military, but not in the way any of them had anticipated. Instead of the standard camouflage utilities they expected from an Army pilot, this person wore the distinctive dress blue uniform of the United States Air Force. The figure was tall and moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command, but it was difficult to make out details from their distance. "That's not Army," David Brennan observed with the precision of someone who'd considered military service during law school. "Apaches are Army aircraft, but that uniform is Air Force. This doesn't make sense." More figures emerged from the helicopter, all in military dress uniforms despite the combat nature of their transportation. They moved with purpose across the lawn toward the hotel's main entrance, their bearing suggesting this was not a random stop or an emergency landing. The hotel manager received a phone call that made his face go even paler than it already was. He hung up and approached the microphone again, his voice shaking slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been informed that someone here has a visitor. This is highly unusual, but we've been asked to cooperate fully with military personnel who will be entering the building momentarily." A collective gasp went up from the assembled crowd. Whatever was happening was not a mistake or an emergency. It was intentional and specific. Someone in their midst had drawn the attention of people important enough to command military aircraft and formal protocol. A visitor? Brittany's voice pitched higher with stress. What kind of visitor arrives in an attack helicopter? The kind, Marcus thought with growing dread, that you definitely don't want to see. His mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Had he unknowingly violated some federal law? Was there some connection to his work at the auto shop that had drawn government attention? Had someone reported him for something he didn't even know he'd done? The ballroom doors opened with authority that cut through the nervous chatter like a knife. The first person to enter was a hotel security guard looking completely out of his depth, followed by what appeared to be a military aide in an immaculate uniform. But it was the third figure that caused every conversation in the room to stop dead. The woman who entered wore the uniform of a United States Air Force colonel, her bearing and decorations indicating someone of considerable rank and responsibility. She was perhaps 40 years old, with graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and the kind of weathered confidence that came from real authority rather than inherited privilege. Her gaze swept the room with professional efficiency, taking in the formal wear and decorative balloons with what might have been amusement. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but sometimes urgency requires flexibility in protocol. I'm Colonel Sarah Martinez, United States Air Force. I'm looking for Marcus Chun." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Every eye in the room turned toward him with expressions ranging from shock to fear to fascination. He felt like he was back in high school, called to the principal's office for some infraction he didn't understand, except this time the principal had arrived in a military helicopter. "That would be me," Marcus said, his voice somehow steady despite the fact that his legs felt like rubber. Is there a problem?" Colonel Martinez's expression softened slightly, though her bearing remained formally military. "No problem at all, Mr. Chun. In fact, quite the opposite. May I speak with you privately?" Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice, and followed the colonel toward a corner of the ballroom where they could speak without being overheard. The entire reunion crowd watched with fascination, their earlier entertainment at his expense forgotten in the face of this unprecedented development. "Mr. Chun," the colonel began, her voice low but carrying an unmistakable note of respect. "I need to ask you some questions about your military service." "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake," Marcus said, confusion replacing his initial fear. "I never served in the military. I've been working as a mechanic since high school." Colonel Martinez studied his face carefully, as if looking for signs of deception or confusion. "Mr. Chun, our records show that you enlisted in the United States Army immediately following your high school graduation in 2014. You completed basic training at Fort Benning and advanced individual training in automotive maintenance. You served with distinction in Afghanistan as part of the 3rd Infantry Division's motor pool operation. Marcus stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she was saying. Ma'am, with all due respect, that's impossible. I've never been in the Army. I've never even left Pennsylvania, except for a few trips to Ohio. The colonel's expression grew more concerned. Mr. Chun, this is very serious. According to our records, you were wounded in action during a convoy attack outside Kandahar in 2016. You were medically evacuated to Germany and then to Walter Reed Medical Center. You were awarded the Purple Heart and the Bronze Star for your actions during the attack. The ballroom had fallen so quiet that everyone could hear this impossible conversation. Marcus felt dizzy, as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Nothing the colonel was saying made any sense, but her certainty was absolute. There has to be some mistake, Marcus said weakly. I think you're looking for a different Marcus, Chun. Colonel Martinez reached into her jacket and withdrew a photograph, holding it where Marcus could see. It showed a young soldier in combat gear, dusty and tired but unmistakably alive. The face in the photograph was Marcus's own face, perhaps 3 years younger, but definitely him. Mr. Chun, the colonel said gently, do you remember anything about your military service? Any gaps in your memory? Any periods of time that seem unclear or missing? Marcus looked at the photograph, then at the colonel, then back at the photograph. It was definitely him, but it was also definitely impossible. He had never worn that uniform, never been to Afghanistan, never served in any capacity with the United States Army. His memories of the last 10 years were continuous and clear, working at Tony's shop, caring for his grandmother, struggling to make ends meet in the same small town where he'd grown up. I don't understand, he whispered, his voice barely audible even in the silent ballroom. Colonel Martinez's expression grew even more serious. Mr. Chun, I need you to come with me. There are people who need to speak with you immediately about some very important matters. National security matters. The words hung in the air like a challenge to reality itself. National security, military service, Afghanistan, Bronze Star. None of it made sense, but the evidence was literally staring him in the face from a military photograph he had no memory of posing for. Behind them, the entire reunion had become an audience for the most impossible moment of Marcus Chen's life. The people who had spent the evening looking down on him, pitying his small accomplishments and limited prospects, now watched in stunned silence as their fundamental assumptions about reality were systematically demolished. Marcus looked around the ballroom one last time, taking in the faces of people who had known him since childhood, people who shared his memories of growing up in this small town. Their expressions reflected his own confusion and disbelief, but underneath that was something new, a dawning recognition that they had been completely wrong about who Marcus Chun really was. I'll come with you, Marcus said finally, his voice stronger now. But I need answers. Real answers. Colonel Martinez nodded with what looked like approval. You'll get them, Mr. Chun. I promise you that. As they walked toward the ballroom doors, past tables full of his former classmates, Marcus felt a strange sense of disconnection from his own life. Everything he thought he knew about himself was suddenly in question, every memory suspect, every assumption about his own identity potentially false. The helicopter's engines were already spinning up as they crossed the hotel lobby, the sound once again filling the building with mechanical thunder. Whatever answers awaited him, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same again. Behind them, in the ballroom that had been the site of so much casual cruelty and social judgment, 200 people sat in complete silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The class loser they had pitted and dismissed had just been claimed by the United States military as a decorated war hero, and none of them had any idea how that was possible. The helicopter ride was surreal beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. One moment he was standing in a hotel ballroom being pitted by his former classmates, and the next he was strapped into the crew compartment of an Apache attack helicopter, wearing a military headset, and watching the lights of his hometown disappear beneath them. Colonel Martinez sat across from him, her expression professional but not unkind. Through the headset, her voice was crisp and clear despite the engine noise. I know this is overwhelming, Mr. Chun. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to process, but I need you to listen carefully and try to remember anything at all that might seem unusual about the last few years of your life. Marcus stared out the helicopter's window at the Pennsylvania countryside rolling by in darkness. Colonel, I don't know what kind of records you have, but they're wrong. I've never served in the military. I've lived in the same town my whole life. I work at Tony's Auto Repair. I took care of my grandmother until she passed away 3 years ago. Tell me about your grandmother's death, Colonel Martinez said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. What were the circumstances? The question seemed oddly specific, but Marcus answered honestly. She had a stroke. It was sudden, she was fine one day, and then I found her collapsed in the kitchen the next morning. She was in a coma for 3 weeks before she died. Colonel Martinez exchanged a meaningful look with a military aide sitting beside her. Mr. Chun, what hospital was she treated at? St. Mary's. It's the only hospital in town. Marcus felt a growing unease. Why are you asking about my grandmother? Because according to our records, Eleanor Chun died in 2019, but not from stroke. She died from injuries sustained in a car accident on Route 15, approximately 2 miles from your home. You were driving the vehicle. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. That's not possible. We never. But even as he protested, something cold and strange was crawling up from the depths of his memory. A flash of headlights. The sound of screeching brakes. The smell of gasoline and blood. Mr. Chun, I need you to focus. Do you remember the accident? Marcus pressed his hands against his temples, suddenly, overwhelmed by images that felt both foreign and familiar. Rain on a windshield. His grandmother's voice saying something urgent. The sensation of the car sliding sideways across wet pavement. There was rain, he said slowly, but that wasn't how she died. She had a stroke. She was in the hospital for weeks. Mr. Chun, your grandmother was killed instantly in the accident. You were critically injured, traumatic brain injury, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. You were in a medically induced coma for 6 weeks. When you woke up, you had significant memory loss. The helicopter banked sharply to the left, and Marcus felt his stomach drop along with the aircraft. None of this made sense. His memories were clear and continuous. He remembered his grandmother's funeral, the weeks of grief, returning to work at Tony's shop to distract himself from the loss. How could all of that be false? You're saying I imagined 3 years of my life. Not imagined, Colonel Martinez corrected. Reconstructed. It's a documented phenomenon in cases of severe brain trauma. The mind creates false memories to fill gaps, often building on partial truths and familiar experiences. The car accident did happen, but your brain processed it as your grandmother having a stroke. The hospital stay did happen, but you were the patient, not the visitor. Marcus felt like he was drowning in impossibility. But I remember working. I remember paying bills, going to her funeral, living my life. You can't fake 3 years of memories. Actually, you can, the colonel said gently, especially when those memories are reinforced by a sophisticated support structure designed to maintain the illusion. Mr. Chun, Tony's Auto Repair has been closed for 4 years. The building is vacant. Tony Ricardo moved to Florida in 2020. The statement was so absurd that Marcus almost laughed. That's ridiculous. I was there yesterday. Tony's fine. He's probably wondering where I am right now. Colonel Martinez handed him a tablet computer. On the screen was a Google Street View image of a strip mall that looked familiar, but wrong. Where Tony's Auto Repair should have been was a space with boarded windows and a for lease sign that looked like it had been there for years. This image was taken last week, the colonel said. Marcus stared at the screen, his hands shaking. The building was definitely the same one where he worked every day, but it looked nothing like the active business he remembered. The paint was faded and peeling, the windows were covered with plywood, and weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot. I don't understand, he whispered. Mr. Chun, after your injury, you were selected for an experimental program run jointly by the Department of Defense and the VA. It's called the Memory Integration Protocol. You were given a new identity and a constructed environment designed to help you recover from both your physical injuries and your psychological trauma. Psychological trauma from what? Colonel Martinez hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. From your military service. Mr. Chun, you weren't just wounded in Afghanistan. You were the sole survivor of an IED attack that killed 4 members of your unit. The psychological impact was severe. More images flooded Marcus's mind, unbidden and terrifying. Sand and heat and the taste of dust. The sound of an explosion that seemed to come from inside his own head. Voices calling for a medic. The weight of someone's blood on his hands. Stop, he said, pressing his palms against his eyes. Please stop. The memory integration protocol was designed to give PTSD patients a chance to recover in a controlled environment, free from the triggers and memories that were preventing their healing. You've been living in what amounts to a therapeutic simulation for the last 3 years. A simulation? Marcus looked around the helicopter's interior, suddenly questioning everything he could see and touch. What does that mean? Are you telling me my entire life is fake? Not fake. Medically necessary. Your injuries were so severe that conventional therapy wasn't working. You were in a constant state of psychological crisis, reliving the attack, unable to function. The protocol gave you a chance to heal by creating a stable, low-stress environment where you could rebuild your sense of self. The helicopter was beginning its descent toward what looked like a military installation. Through the windows, Marcus could see a complex of buildings surrounded by high fences and bright security lighting. It looked nothing like any place in Pennsylvania he recognized. Where are we? Walter Reed Medical Center, Maryland. Mr. Chun, there's something else you need to know. The memory integration protocol was scheduled to end 3 months ago. You were supposed to be gradually reintegrated with your real memories and return to normal life. But something went wrong with the process. What kind of something? Colonel Martinez looked uncomfortable for the first time since entering the hotel ballroom. You've disappeared. One day you were in the controlled environment, and the next you were gone. Our monitoring systems showed you returning to your hometown and resuming the fictional life we had created for you. But that should have been impossible. The support infrastructure had been dismantled. So how was I living there? How was I working at a closed auto shop? How was I paying rent on an apartment? We don't know. That's why I was sent to find you. Mr. Chun, in the 3 months since you disappeared, you've been living a life that shouldn't exist, supported by resources that shouldn't be available, in a reality that we thought we had complete control over. The helicopter touched down with a gentle bump, and Marcus could see medical personnel and officials waiting on a landing pad. His head was spinning with questions and half-formed memories that felt both real and impossible. Colonel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me a straight answer. Of course. The people at my reunion tonight, my classmates, my teachers, they remember me from high school. They remember me being there for 4 years. If my whole life is some kind of experiment or simulation, how do they have memories of me that go back to childhood? Colonel Martinez was quiet for a long moment as the helicopter's engines wound down. Mr. Chun, that's one of the questions we're hoping you can help us answer. Because according to our records, you didn't attend Lincoln High School. You were homeschooled by your grandmother in a different state entirely. Your military service began immediately after you received your GED at age 18. Then, who was at that reunion? Who were those people? We don't know. The simple admission was more terrifying than any of the revelations that had come before. Marcus felt like reality itself was dissolving around him, leaving him suspended in a void where nothing could be trusted, and everything he thought he knew was suddenly questionable. Medical personnel approached the helicopter as the rotors came to a complete stop. Through the window, Marcus could see doctors in white coats, military officials in dress uniforms, and people in civilian clothes who looked like government bureaucrats or intelligence analysts. Mr. Chun, Colonel Martinez said as they prepared to exit the aircraft, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to understand something. Whatever has been happening to you for the last 3 years, whatever reality you've been experiencing, it's been outside our control and beyond our understanding. We need your help to figure out what's going on. And if I refuse to help, the colonel's expression grew grave. Then we're all in serious trouble. Because if someone has the ability to create false realities convincing enough to fool both you and a room full of people who share detailed memories that shouldn't exist, then we're dealing with something far beyond anything we've ever encountered before. As they stepped out of the helicopter onto the military medical center's landing pad, Marcus realized that his problems were much larger than the social humiliation he'd experienced at his high school reunion. He wasn't just a small-town mechanic who'd been invited to be mocked by his former classmates. He was apparently a decorated war veteran with no memory of his service, a patient in an experimental program that had somehow gone wrong, and possibly the key to understanding a mystery that had implications for national security. The people waiting to greet them looked like they had been expecting him, but their expressions suggested they were as confused about his situation as he was. Whatever answers they were hoping to find, it was clear that Marcus Chun was as much a puzzle to the military and medical establishment as his own life had become to him. Behind them, The helicopter's rotors began to spin up again, and Marcus realized there would be no going back to the simple life he thought he had been living. Whether that life had been real or simulated, therapeutic or dangerous, it was over now. What came next was completely unknown territory for everyone involved. The debriefing room at Walter Reed Medical Center felt like something out of a science fiction movie. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying brain scans, psychological profiles, and data streams that Marcus couldn't begin to understand. A team of doctors, military officials, and what appeared to be intelligence analysts had assembled to try to make sense of his impossible situation. Dr. Rebecca Hassan, the lead neuropsychologist for the Memory Integration Protocol, sat across from Marcus at a polished conference table. Her expression was a mixture of scientific curiosity and genuine concern as she reviewed the initial assessment reports. "Mr. Chun, I want you to understand that what's happened to you is unprecedented in our experience," she began, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. "We've been running the Memory Integration Protocol for 5 years, and we've never had a patient simply disappear from the controlled environment and resume a fictional life." Marcus rubbed his temples, where a persistent headache had been building since the helicopter ride. "Dr. Hassan, I keep hearing about this controlled environment, but I need you to explain what that actually means. Was I in some kind of facility? Was I being monitored? How does someone live a fake life for 3 years without knowing it?" The Memory Integration Protocol uses a combination of advanced medical technology and carefully constructed social environments, Dr. Hassan explained. Patients are placed in communities designed to look and feel completely normal, but every aspect is controlled and monitored. The residents, the businesses, the social interactions, everything is managed to provide a therapeutic environment free from trauma triggers. You're talking about fake towns with fake people? Think of it more as therapeutic communities with trained support staff. The goal is to give severely traumatized veterans a chance to rebuild their sense of self in a safe, predictable environment. Once they've stabilized, they're gradually reintroduced to their real memories and reintegrated into normal life. Colonel Martinez, who had been silent since their arrival, leaned forward. "Mr. Chun, what makes your case unique is that you left the therapeutic community and somehow recreated elements of it in the real world. You were living in an actual town with actual people, but maintaining relationships and routines that should have been impossible." Dr. Hassan pulled up a file on her tablet. "We've been investigating your situation since you disappeared 3 months ago. Your apartment in Pennsylvania exists, but the lease is paid for by a shell company with no traceable ownership. Tony's auto repair has been closed for years, but someone has been maintaining the illusion that it's still operational, paying utilities, keeping up appearances, even providing you with a steady paycheck. Someone has been taking care of me without me knowing it. That's what we're trying to understand. Either someone has invested significant resources in maintaining your fictional life, or..." Dr. Hassan hesitated. "Or what? Or the memory integration protocol has evolved beyond our control and understanding." The implications of that statement hung in the air like a threat. Marcus thought about his reunion classmates, their detailed memories of growing up with him, their casual familiarity with his family history. If those memories were somehow false, then the scope of whatever was happening was staggering. "Dr. Hassan, there's something I need to tell you about tonight. The people in my high school reunion, they all remembered me. They had specific memories of events from our childhood. If I never attended that school, how is that possible?" The medical team exchanged glances that suggested this was not welcome news. Dr. Hassan made notes on her tablet, while Colonel Martinez picked up a secure phone and began speaking in urgent, low tones. "Mr. Chun, we need to explore this carefully. Can you describe some of the specific memories your classmates shared? The more detail, the better." For the next hour, Marcus recounted everything he could remember from the reunion. The conversations, the shared references, the casual way people had discussed events from their teenage years. As he spoke, the team's expressions grew increasingly concerned. Dr. Hassan finally looked up from her notes. "Mr. Chun, what you're describing suggests that approximately 200 people have been implanted with false memories of your shared history. That level of manipulation would require technology and resources far beyond anything in our current capabilities. Are you saying it's impossible?" "I'm saying it shouldn't be possible, but the evidence suggests it happened anyway." Colonel Martinez finished her phone conversation and returned to the table. "We've confirmed the basic details. Lincoln High School exists. They did have a reunion tonight, and their records show you as a graduate of the class of 2014. But our records show you were homeschooled in Ohio and enlisted immediately after receiving your GED. So which records are right? That's what we need to determine. But first, we need to run some medical tests. Dr. Hassan needs to examine your current brain function and compare it to your baseline readings from the protocol. The next several hours blurred together in a series of medical procedures that felt both invasive and surreal. MRI scans, psychological assessments, blood work, and neurological evaluations. Through it all, Marcus felt like a specimen being studied by scientists who were trying to solve a puzzle that challenged everything they thought they knew about memory, identity, and reality itself. While he waited for the test results, Marcus was given quarters in the medical center's secure wing. The room was comfortable, but clearly designed for patients who needed to be monitored. Security cameras, locked windows, and a door that could only be opened from the outside. Dr. Hassan visited him the next morning with a thick folder of test results and an expression that suggested the news wasn't going to be simple. Mr. Chun, your current brain scans are unusual. The damage from your original injury has healed remarkably well, but there are neural patterns we've never seen before. It's as if your brain has developed new pathways, new connections that shouldn't exist based on known neurological principles. What does that mean? We're not entirely sure, but it's possible that the memory integration protocol triggered some kind of neurological adaptation that we didn't anticipate. Your brain may have developed the ability to interface with external systems in ways we never intended. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. External systems? The memory integration protocol uses advanced computer systems to monitor and guide patients' experiences. It's possible that your brain has somehow maintained a connection to those systems even after you left the controlled environment. You're saying my brain is connected to a computer? Dr. Hassan chose her words carefully. We're saying that might be one explanation for what's happening. But, Mr. Chun, there's something else you need to know. We've been investigating the town where you've been living, trying to understand how your fictional life was maintained. And the town exists, but many of the people you've been interacting with don't. Tony Ricardo, your boss at the auto shop, there's no record of him ever existing. Mrs. Henderson, your neighbor, no birth certificate, no social security number, no history of any kind before 3 years ago. Marcus felt like the ground was disappearing beneath his feet again. Are you telling me I've been talking to ghosts? We're telling you that someone or something has been maintaining an incredibly sophisticated illusion around you. The question is why and what they want. Colonel Martinez entered the room with a grim expression and a secure tablet in her hands. Mr. Chun, we've received some new intelligence that changes everything. Last night, while you were at your reunion, similar events occurred in 17 other locations around the country. Similar events? Military personnel retrieving individuals from social situations where they were being observed or celebrated by groups of people with impossible memories. Mr. Chun, you're not alone. There are at least 18 people like you, all veterans of the memory integration protocol, all living fictional lives that shouldn't be possible. The implications were staggering. Marcus thought about the casual cruelty of his former classmates, their surprise at his presence, the way the evening had unfolded like some kind of elaborate performance. Colonel, do you think the reunion was staged? Were those people real? We don't know, but we're beginning to suspect that all of you were brought together last night for a reason. The timing is too coordinated to be coincidental. Dr. Hassan pulled up a new file on her tablet. Mr. Chun, there's something else. The other 17 individuals who were retrieved last night, they all have the same unusual neural patterns that you do. Whatever happened to your brain during the protocol, it happened to all of you. What are you saying? We're saying that the memory integration protocol may have been more than just a therapeutic program. It may have been an experiment in something else entirely. Something that created 18 people with enhanced neurological capabilities and then set them loose in the world to see what would happen. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the medical center's grounds. Everything he thought he knew about his life had been systematically demolished over the last 24 hours. His job, his home, his relationships, his very identity, all of it was apparently part of some elaborate construct that he couldn't understand. Dr. Hassan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Am I still me? Is Marcus Chun real? Or am I just another part of this experiment? The doctor was quiet for a long moment before answering. Mr. Chun, that's the question we're all trying to answer. Your core personality, your memories from before your military service, your fundamental sense of self, all of that appears to be genuine. But the experiences that shaped you over the last few years, the life you thought you were living, the people you thought you knew, much of that was constructed. So who am I really? You're a decorated veteran who sacrificed everything for his country and paid a terrible price for his service. You're someone who was so damaged by trauma that conventional medicine couldn't help you. You're a person who was given a chance to heal through an experimental program that may have saved your life and sanity. Colonel Martinez approached the window. Mr. Chun, you're also possibly the key to understanding something that could have national security implications. If someone has the technology to create false memories, manipulate reality, and control people without their knowledge, we need to know who they are and what they want. Marcus turned back to face the room. And what if I don't want to be the key to anything? What if I just want to go back to my life, even if it's fake? That's not an option anymore, Dr. Hassan said gently. Whatever reality you were living in, it was unstable and potentially dangerous. But more importantly, you now have knowledge and possibly abilities that make you too valuable and too vulnerable to simply return to civilian life. What are you saying? Colonel Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Chun, we're saying that your life as Marcus Chun, small-town mechanic, is over. What comes next depends on choices you're going to have to make about who you want to be and what you want to do with capabilities you don't even fully understand yet. As Marcus looked around the room at the people who were trying to help him make sense of his impossible situation, he realized that his high school reunion had been more than just an evening of social humiliation. It had been the end of one life and the beginning of something entirely different. The class loser who had walked into that hotel ballroom was gone forever. What emerged from Walter Reed Medical Center would be someone else entirely. A man with a mysterious past, an uncertain future, and abilities that even the government's best scientists couldn't fully explain. For the first time since the helicopter had landed on the hotel lawn, Marcus Chin smiled. He might not know who he really was or what he was really capable of, but he was done being underestimated by anyone.